That's right, my friends. Why don't you come on in while we just do a final systems check? Just a few routine... Hey, Bo! Hey, Bo! Hey, Bo! Don't worry. This is all part of the demonstration. Just testing.
Nemo! I am not going to lose you again. Do you hear me? Nemo!
As you enter our soundstage, we ask that you please keep your parties together and please refrain from smoking, eating, drinking, and flash photography. Thank you.
WDW Radio, your information station. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the WDW Radio Show, your Walt Disney World information station. I am your host, Lou Mongello, and this is show number 212 for the week of March 6th, 2011. Walt Disney World is filled with overlooked experiences, hidden treasures, and even a few wonderful locations that are often missed by even the most seasoned guest. One such place can be found at the Villas at Disney's Wilderness Lodge, and is a quiet, cozy room filled with great stories and direct connections to Walt Disney. This week, we'll visit and take a close look at the Carolwood Pacific Room, filled with photos, trains, and some very intriguing pieces of authentic Disney history. It's both a museum honoring Walt Disney's love of trains, as well as a quiet getaway. I'll have a few important announcements about some upcoming events, and then play more of your voicemails at the end of the show, so sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of the WDW Radio Show. I often talk about overlooked experiences inside the parks, whether they may be things beyond the attractions and the shows and things to do as you're wandering through, details to stop and notice. And we've talked in the past about some of those details being in places outside the parks, like the resorts and downtown Disney and really everywhere on property. But oftentimes when I come to Walt Disney World, I like to just find places to sit back, relax, and enjoy the environment. And that especially holds true at some of the resorts because they are so very well themed, and that is your opportunity to take some time and enjoy the decor and the details and the ambiance of where you are. And I almost hate doing this segment because I'm going to give away one of my favorite sort of out-of-the-way places to sit and relax in sort of a little quiet nook located at one of the Walt Disney World resorts. And before I tell you what it is, I want to introduce my very special guest who's going to talk to us not just about the location and the venue and the incredible details, but the story behind it and its relation to Walt Disney. And you remember him from such podcasts as Walt Disney, One Man's Dream. He is, of course, the indomitable Jim Korkis.
I have never been called that before. A lot of adjectives used to describe me, but never that. And Lou, as always, a real joy to talk with you and again, share with your listeners. You have some of the best, most knowledgeable listeners in the world. I've had the opportunity to meet some of them in person, like at your 200th podcast. They are just terrific. I hope each one has bought a copy of my book, The Vault of Walt, at Amazon.com, and have bought copies for their friends, and an extra copy in case the first copy gets lost or ruined, and Amazon selling it for only $14 right now. So
one to read, one to preserve on the shelf. That's the idea. So, but Jim and I, we are spending a nice quiet evening, and I was sincere when I said this is one of my favorite sort of out-of-the-way places to get away from the parks. I don't know if you can hear the ambient background music behind us, but another reason why I like this is not just because of the big comfy chairs and the fireplace, but because of the story that this has. Not just its imagineered story, but its relationship to Walt Disney, the man. And we are in the Carolwood Pacific Room over at the Disney's Wilderness Lodge villas. This was originally known as the Iron Spike Room, so obviously you get a sense that it very much has to do with Walt Disney's personal love of trains, as well as the railroad connection that I think a lot of people overlook, maybe don't understand or see when they walk in the door, and its connection to Wilderness Lodge.
Absolutely, and we're hearing the ambient sound, but we're not hearing the ambient sound of other people, because I don't think a lot of people know where this is. This is one of my favorite locations as well. And so if Fort Wilderness is the story of the settlers of the wilderness with the log cabins there, and if Wilderness Lodge is the story of the explorers and trappers and the Native Americans, the story of the villas here are the stories of the railroad workers who opened up the wilderness. So, in fact, when we first came in, after we passed a wonderful sign of Mickey and Humphrey the Bear in silhouette, we entered the lobby, and the lobby is done up as a roundhouse because, again, this was done by railroad workers. And up above we saw animal carvings, again done by William Robinson, who did a lot of the animal carvings in the Wilderness Lodge. And we saw the Ingle Nook, which we realized we were unable to drink because Ingle Nook is actually a chimney corner. And then we came into the Iron Spike Room. The Iron Spike Room was dedicated in October 2003. And then Michael Broggie, who wrote a magnificent book, Walt Disney's Railroad Story, which I highly recommend.
He actually was one of my very early guests on the show, going back to probably single-digit shows back in 2007.
And how jealous are you that he knew Walt personally and rode on Walt's backyard train?
His Walt Disney ice cream story still resonates with me to this day. I'll try and link in this week's show notes, but you can go to iTunes or WDWRadio.com, go back to the very early shows. You've got to hear the interview with Michael Broggie and his stories, personal stories of Walt Disney.
And thanks to him, this room, this area, was rededicated in October 2007 as the Carrollwood Pacific Room. And, of course, Michael is the president of the Carrollwood Pacific Historical Society, a great website to visit. But Carrollwood Pacific refers to Walt's backyard train, which existed in his Holmby Hills home from May of 1950 through the spring of 1953. Walt had this wonderful railroad background. Growing up in Marceline, Missouri, he loved hearing, there was a train station there, but trains would go by all the time. He loved hearing those. His uncle was Mike Martin, who was a engineer on the Santa Fe and would take Walt and Roy on the train and bring them candy, tell them wonderful stories. And something that a lot of people don't realize is that Walt's father, Elias, worked for a brief time before he married Flora for the Union Pacific as a machinist and laying rails, laying track between Kansas and Colorado. So he had stories to tell Walt as well. And Roy O. Disney, his older brother, was a news butcher, a candy butcher on the Santa Fe, and that meant that it was a young boy, and he held that little box with straps in front of him and sold cigars and candy and cold soda pop and things like that, and sandwiches, walking up and down all of the cars. And Roy did that for about 2 summers, maybe 3, and then he got Walt a job, and Walt only lasted 1 summer because Walt was a terrible businessman because you make your profit on after people drink the soda pop on getting the deposit on the bottles. And some of the passengers thought he was just a kids, so they would take the bottles and they would actually throw them out the windows just to see them splatter out there. But the big mistake Walt would make was Walt would gather up the empties and then put them in the back car, and sometimes the cars would shift out. And so one time he lost all the empty bottles completely. But Walt was very, very clever and very, very curious. And so he would go back into the baggage car and sell cigars and chewing tobacco to the workers who were there, and he'd hear all these stories. And he would also climb over the tender into the engine cabin for cigars and to chewing tobacco for the engineers there. And they showed him exactly how a train works. Sometimes they would even let him run the things besides just pulling the whistle. And so by the end of that summer, Walt ended up owing money to the company, but had this huge knowledge and love of trains that came out a lot later in his life.
And certainly we see, and we all know the story, moving forward about him putting the train in his backyard, why all of the Disney theme parks have a train surrounding their Magic Kingdoms.
And that was wonderful. Walt, of course, was looking for a hobby, and people who worked at his studio, including Ward Kimball, had a full-size train in his backyard, and Ollie Johnston had a small-sized train in his backyard and all of that, and Walt thought this was a great idea, so he hooked up with Roger Broggie, Michael's father, who is often called the first Imagineer, and in the machine shop at the studio there, literally built the Lily Bell, the engine there. This was 1/8 scale, and it's the number 173 because it was based on the plans for an 1880s Central Pacific engine, the 173, which was very stylish. And Walt, of course, named it Lily Bell to try and get on his wife's good side because she didn't want this dirty, smelly thing steaming through her backyard, especially through her flower garden while she was playing bridge with her friends. So Walt literally had to get the lawyer at the Disney Studios to draw up a right-of-way contract and have his wife and his daughters sign it. And the only way he got it was by promising not to go through the flower bed. And so he looked at all sorts of things like a raised berm or a bridge, and finally settled on a tunnel that would go underneath the flowers. But knowing Walt, it wasn't an ordinary tunnel, it was an S-curve tunnel, so that when you went into the tunnel, you couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, so you didn't know how long that was going to be. So that also affected dark rides later at Disneyland, and someone came up to Walt and said, well, it would be cheaper if you just went straight. And Walt said, it would be cheaper if I didn't do it at all. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. So, he had a little barn there, and he put in, interestingly enough, a CTC system. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with trains or model railroading or whatever, that system would have allowed more trains to be put on. So instead of just one train, there could have been several trains, and that system would have helped avoid collisions so that one train wouldn't run into another train. Something that a lot of people don't realize, because there's always more to a story, is that in spring of 1953, when he closed down the whole thing, at the studio they were actually building a second engine. And Walt put a stop to that. He put a stop to it in 1953 because his backyard was filling up with strangers, because as soon as word got around that there's a train and you can get free rides, there were all sorts of people. And so Walt was worried about accidents. Walt was worried about, and there had been an accident in 53 where the engine had tipped over and hot steam had come out of the whistle, and a little girl who was curious came over to take a look, and she got minor burns on one of her legs, and Walt put ice on it and reassured her, and but Walt realized, oh my gosh, this has become too popular for that to happen. And in fact,
we have to stop for a second because we need to sort of put this in context. And I did the same thing to Michael Broggie because he's talking about riding on these miniature trains. And for those who maybe aren't familiar with scale, think of a sort of normal size train boxcar or cattle car. This size scale was maybe 4 feet long or so, maybe 2 feet wide. But they were big enough so that a child or a small adult like myself could actually ride in a car or on top of it. So you were able to go, friends were coming over to Walt Disney's house to go into his backyard, ride the train that he basically put together, and then, oh, by the way, he'd probably make you an ice cream cone or put water on your burner. We can't fathom that now.
And it probably wasn't an ice cream cone, it was an ice cream soda because he loved mixing flavors. And one time he came up with a champagne ice cream float, which his daughter Sharon said was just absolutely hideous. But Walt loved to experiment. And yes, one of the exciting things here in the Carolwood Pacific Room is we have 2 of the cars that Walt built and a stretch of track. He had over 2,600 feet of track in his backyard there. And over here we have the cattle car and we have a gondola that were the actual part of the Carolwood Pacific. And again, people don't know that. People don't come here and take a look. This was donated by Diane Disney Miller and the Disney family. The rest of the Carolwood Pacific is up at the Disney Family Museum in San Francisco. And again, we should also mention it's called Carolwood Pacific because his home was on Carolwood Drive. So that's why it was the Carolwood Pacific. And as we were talking a little earlier today, the gondola there, and there were 2 of them, served the purpose that a small child could ride in them, or a woman with a dress. So it would be modest instead of straddling on top of a cattle car or a box car. As you went around, and yes, it's amazing how small they are right now. So obviously people in the 50s were a lot smaller than you and I, Lou, because I don't think I would have been able to have balanced on that because, again, you'd have the vibration of that going through. You're going over an overhead trestle that went over Yensid Valley, which, of course, is Disney spelled backwards, and you're going through the tunnel. The whole thing. In fact, Roy E. Disney told the story that he derailed the train one time because he was sitting up on that cattle car, and just as kids would do, he was running his foot on the gravel nearby, and the gravel kicked up into the wheels and derailed the car here. And fortunately, we also have that's an 1/8 scale, but we also have a G scale model that was produced by Heartland Locomotive as a commemorative edition back for the 100 Years of Magic in 2001. So you get a look, and we've got those wonderful photos too of all of this. And Roger Broggie said that, yes, it was heartbreaking when Walt said, yeah, come take the train and let's put it in storage. So they shoved the cars into the tunnel and then boarded up the tunnel. The caboose, which was Walt's favorite, went into the barn. And then the Lily Bell, the engine, was taken to the studio and was actually put underneath Bob Gurr's desk. And hey, don't put that under my desk. No, you don't say those things. And put under his desk. And Bob said that, yeah, Walt would come by every now and then and take a look and touch it very affectionately and go, surely there's something we can do. Can we put the track around the back of this studio and all of this? And so, yes, very much the birth of Disneyland. And
well, and I think it's important because you mentioned Disneyland. Everyone says, "Oh, that's where Walt walked." And when we talked about one man's dream, we look for things that were Walt. Was that really his desk? Did he do the Dancing Man? But this is an important piece of Disney history. And people say, "Well, Walt Disney World has no real connection to Walt. This is something that, beyond something he created for the theme parks, was very personal to him and truly something that he enjoyed. And I think that's why it's important that we introduce people to the fact that it's here, because I think even we saw a few people walk by, they either didn't pay attention or didn't realize, beyond the beautiful pictures of Walt that are in here, that's something that Walt touched, it's something he worked on that meant so much to him.
Well, that's the advantage and disadvantage of Walt Disney World, is that it really is a place of discovery. Unless you know, there are so many things you're going to miss. But once you discover them, it's wonderful, and it's wonderful to share with friends and family for that to happen. And speaking of missing things, we did that podcast on the Wilderness Lodge. There's a whole part of Wilderness Lodge history that is just lost. And what's amazing to me is if a story is invisible, if guests don't understand the story, then the story just dies. And usually if a story is too complicated, it dies. So we always talk about the Pleasure Island story and the story of Meriwether Adam Pleasure and the plaques and that went on for pages and pages and pages, and I'll be serious. I've been researching it for years, and I still run across little elements of that story, but it got so complicated people couldn't follow it. As opposed to the story of the Haunted Mansion is very simple. It's 999 happy haunts that have retired, but they're looking to socialize, and they're looking for one more to join them.
Well, it's simple, but more importantly, it's visible. The story of Wilderness Lodge, and you'll get to how that story was presented to guests, was almost something that they kind of had to look for. And Pleasure Island is the same way. Yeah, there were plaques, most of which were overlooked because of where they were placed. Certainly no depth in the backstory, but if anybody walked here into the villas, they wouldn't get the sense that the people who were building the railroad heading out west built this as the place that they were going to live. And I think we find this a lot in Disney World. You can't walk into the Emporium and understand the story of Osh Popham and the progression of that. And that's why I love doing these things with you, to share, because we want people to appreciate what they're seeing and understand it, more importantly.
Right, and to know the story, because if you know the story, then you're more likely to share it with others, and that's very important. Now, with the Wilderness Lodge, they did try to make a effort when the lodge opened in 1994 to share the story. When you registered, when you checked in, you were given a newspaper, and the newspaper, of course, had all those guest services you needed to know about. When is the pool open? Where can you go eat? What are those hours for that? All of that. But very cleverly, they did it up as a commemorative newspaper called the Silver Creek Star, because, of course, coming out of the Wilderness Lodge is Silver Creek, which is going down to the swimming pool there and out to Bay Lake. And so they had all of this information, but there was still plenty of space. So what they did is they put in the story, the history of the Wilderness Lodge. And that history began with Colonel Ezekiel Moreland, who was a field commander in the War of 1812. And roughly about 10 years later, about 1823, by then he was widowed. He had an adult daughter who was an art curator. But he was inspired by the explorations of Lewis and Clark. So he put together a group of 50 people, of topographers, photographers, ex-military men, whatever, and they started off from St. Louis. They were going off to explore the Wild West. And about 80 miles into this adventure, they ran into a buffalo stampede, 10,000 buffalo. And so they climbed trees and rocks and all this to get out of the way, but the camp was destroyed. Most of their food was destroyed. And so everybody wanted to limp back to St. Louis. And basically, Colonel Moreland said, "You bunch of cowards, I've got my gun, I've got the courage, that's all I need." And he disappeared for 2 years. Now, during those 2 years, apparently he discovered the wonderful valley where Wilderness Lodge was eventually built, and had some adventures. But coming out of those adventures for 2 years, he came out with some beaver pelts and some other valuable furs, and so he was literally a very, very rich man. And so he went to talk with his daughter Genevieve, who was nicknamed Jenny, and that is really where the story of the Wilderness Lodge begins.
And again, something that is invisible to guests. If they had not taken the time to read their things, they would not understand where that came from and where things like Aunt Jenny's came from and how these things got their names.
And so basically what happened is Jenny took a leave of absence from her job as an art curator. There was a young artist, Gustav, who was infatuated with Jenny, but also loved all the stories he was hearing about the wilderness and all this. And so Colonel Moreland mounted another expedition, and they came out and they started to build the lodge. Actually, before they built the lodge, Gustav saw this rock outcropping, and it showed this beautiful vista, so he climbed up there and set up his easel and his paints and all of this, and there was a slight tremor. So the easel almost fell off, he almost fell off, but he caught it all in time, and he smiled to the colonel, and he says, "Hey, I'm a pioneer as well." And the colonel smiled back because he knew what was going to happen next. The geyser went off, and so the easel fell over, and Gustav, he wasn't hurt, but he loved that location, and so he'd go there to paint, and other artists came to paint. And so later, as the lodge expanded, to honor that, they built Artist's Point. So you have that huge vista that these artists saw, as well as all of these murals along the wall. And that cabin out there where you can rent boats and all that, that was supposed to be Moreland's first cabin on his first visit out here. That's what he built. That's why it's so small. It's not small because it's a rental place. It's small because that's all Moreland could build. So all of this is getting tied together, and it all gets convoluted, where you're coming up with a story for everything, including a swimming pool, for crying out loud. So the story of the swimming pool actually started with Georgie McGregor, who showed up. This was after Moreland had passed away, and Jenny had really committed to building this as a lodge so that people could really enjoy the wilderness. Artists, writers, all of this could come out. And so Georgie said, "Well, I'm a cook because there's a shortage of cooks out in the Wild West." And so she hired him, but his cooking was terrible. The people were complaining about holes in the fish, and nothing tasted good, and all of this. She was going to give Georgie a room in the lodge, and he says, "No, I'll just make a small cabin out there by the creek, because it'll be easier to wash pots and pans, and I'll be able to fish and catch the trout." Well, one day on a surprise visit, and that's why it's called Trout Pass out there. Jenny went out to check on him and found that he was using the pots and pans to look for gold and silver in the stream, and she had to explain to him, there's only fool's gold out here. Yes, it's a hot mineral stream, but there's no gold, there's no silver. And she saw that he was shooting the trout with his gun, which is why the fish were having holes in it. And she said, "No, this place is going to be known for its culinary, for its cooking. I can't afford to have you, have this terrible reputation." So she fired him as a cook, brought in a wonderful cook who did some wonderful dishes. But in order for him to pay off what he owed, Georgie had to do some stuff around the lodge, including some errands, going to the trading post, serving breakfast. And so one morning, after returning from the trading post with 2 crates, one he dropped off in the kitchen, and he served breakfast, and everybody was commenting on how great the breakfast was. "Oh, this is a marvelous breakfast." As they were eating, there was a huge explosion. So it wasn't the fire rock geyser. What had happened is he had gotten dynamite. As a result, he blew a huge crater into the stream, and he was sent flying up into the top of a tree. But the guests of the lodge loved the crater because it gave them a wonderful place to bathe. And so that's the story of the swimming pool. The story of the Fire Rock Geyser is on Moreland's first trip out into the wilderness and discovering the valley. He set up a tent by Bay Lake, but the cold winter air coming across the lake and all of that, he was starting to shiver, so he moved closer to the hot springs. And imagine his surprise when a hunting party, a Native American, showed up because they had been using this area for years to extend their hunting season. And he didn't speak their language, they didn't speak his, but he smiled, he offered them food, and eventually they communicated, and the wise man of the tribe, Running Elk, who only had 2 teeth, told the story of the fact that, yes, the first Indian hunting party discovered this area when it was just freezing and in snow, and they set up a fire, which they had to keep going 24 hours because it was just so cold. But after the 5th day, they noticed that the earth was cracking and rumbling. And so what do? Have they angered the gods by misusing fire with this continuous fire? But they're so cold, they tossed on another log, and that was basically about it. The earth just exploded. The geyser came up, blew up a lot of their camp high into the air, and they ran away telling people to avoid this valley because they had angered the gods. But after a period of time, other Indian hunting parties realized that no, this was a blessing from the gods, so they could extend their hunting season. Wonderful story. Guests were taking a look at the newspaper and going, "Where do I get the towels?" So the entire story was lost, and then over the years, what happens is the Silver Creek Star newspaper became smaller and smaller, and as it became smaller and smaller, things were taken out. That story was taken out, and to me, the sad part of this story is one of the hidden treasures here at Walt Disney World is the Wilderness Lodge. Still, Thursday through Sunday, gives a free tour called Mysteries of the Lodge, Treasures of the Lodge.
I think it's the Treasures of the Lodge.
Yes, and so it's absolutely free.
Taste of the Lodge.
Okay, and it's absolutely free. It's like about 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's Treasure Lodge, Taste of the Lodge. I don't know if they still do that one.
No, I don't think
That's the culinary one. Yeah, the architectural and landscaping one might be Treasures of the Lodge.
So call before you come out because they're constantly changing because they used to offer it every day of the week, and as Lou was saying, they also offered one where you would go in and you'd get a nice little free taste. And so you have a ranger that takes you around and will explain some of the things about the lodge. But he also has what is called the Big Book of the Lodge. And that's so in case guests ask questions and the ranger doesn't have that in his particular spiel or whatever, he can go back, behind the check-in counter and open the binder, the Big Book of the Lodge, and probably find the answer. And I took the tour just about 2 months ago. Loved it, but I asked about Ezekiel Moreland and that story, and the ranger said, "Well, I've heard that, but we don't have that in the big binder." And she says, "We don't even have a copy of that original newspaper to go with that." And that whole tour started with a cast member by the name of Stan Moore. So it was Ranger Stan for 20 years. He retired 2 years ago on Halloween. And he came down because he wanted to spend time with his daughter and his grandson. And he got a job at Disney, actually working as a bus driver over at Fort Wilderness. And as soon as he got that job, his daughter and grandson moved away. I believe it was the general manager over there, brought him over to Wilderness Lodge, and he started Ranger Stan. So he started the flag raising for families in the morning and taking people around on a little tour so that they could better appreciate the resort. And I'm sure some of the listeners here have wonderful memories of Ranger Stan because he did it for 20 years, for crying out loud. I went on a Ranger Stan tour, and he just seemed warm and wonderful and knowledgeable. And I wish more cast members would do that, and more resorts would have tours tell us the story of that, because we were talking that there's stories at the other resorts.
Ranger Stan was very much like Art the Greeter, somebody who was a fixture at the beach club. Everybody loved and was one of those exceptional cast members. But you're right. You know, we were talking about the very detailed story here, we thought about Pleasure Island. I think about Adventurers Club and the detailed backstory there. We did a show probably 2 years ago, somewhere in 2008. I'll link it up in this week's show notes, where we talked about Port Orleans, because that too, Dixie Landings, Port Orleans, the two resorts have also a very, very detailed backstory and questions I consistently get when we talk about these, because people, I think, are fascinated by the fact that they exist. It makes things make sense. It connects them to a story that they didn't know exists. The two questions I get most often are, number one, where do they keep all these stories? Who has all these stories? You evidence that sometimes Disney doesn't even have them because they're created to develop a lodge and then they're lost over time. Sometimes maybe they feel they're not that important to keep. And then other people ask me, well, if nobody knows these stories and nobody is relaying these stories, why does Disney create them in the first place? If they've already designed the geyser, why do they feel the need to create this elaborate backstory that nobody's going to tell, nobody will ever find out?
Well, oftentimes business needs change, and the Disney brand changes. In fact, a perfect example is Pleasure Island. You know, it's now going to become Hyperion Wharf, and so Pleasure Island is now expunged from the storyline. Is at Toontown Fair, is Cornelius Coote going to be eliminated, even though he's lasted since Mickey's Birthday Land? And again, stories are a living oral tradition, so they can change, and you oftentimes adapt stories to new audiences, but a classic story is a classic story. And one of the things I've been doing lately is doing some research into the stories of the resorts, and at Port Orleans, one of the things is that when Port Orleans opened, they had a restaurant called Bon Famille. And people go, oh, yes. But a lot of people don't realize that character was the woman who's was the owner of Duchess the Cat from Aristocats and all of that. And if you ate there, the children's menu had a little scrapbook that told the story of the Aristocats taking the ocean voyage to coming over to New Orleans, and then her deciding to open a restaurant there. But in that scrapbook, it also told that as on the trip across, a sea serpent caught the attention of that and followed them to New Orleans because he loved music, and so he decided to stay there. And his name is Scales, not just because there are musical scales, but as a tribute to Scales and Arpeggios, which was the song the Sherman Brothers did in the Aristocats. And that little children's menu, which no longer exists, was created by Greg Airbar. And you should go buy his book Mousetracks and go visit his Mousetracks website. But he also named several other things. The food court often had separate little areas, and there was a place that sold beignets, and thank heavens, I love beignets. Thank heavens it's not closer that I would have it every single day. But the name of the place was Jacques Beignet's Bakery. And Greg started laughing, and he says, well, you got the joke, right? And I said, well, Jacques, that's French for Jim, and beignet. And he says, no, say Jacques Beignet and say it fast. And so I kept saying it faster and faster. Jack Benny's, Jack Benny's. And so all of those little things, but yes, they're lost because they're not being documented. Some are being passed along orally to other cast members, but they're being passed along, especially like at the Haunted Mansion, inaccurately. And so that changes the story entirely. So those of you who listen to Lou's podcast, you have a real responsibility. And your responsibility is to take these wonderful stories and to share them with others. And in that way, they're never lost. They go on for new generations and bring in another little piece of the puzzle of Disney history.
Well, Jim, you are such a prolific writer, having written for Disney Files magazine and obviously the Vault of Walt. I can't
Celebrations.
speak Celebrations magazine. But the reason why I like having you come on here is because you are a master storyteller. You are continuing a tradition that began with early man, and I sort of want people to feel as though they're sitting around the campfire, they're sitting around the diner table, whatever it might be, and hearing you recount those stories is so much better than just the written word. And you're right. I hope people not only learn and appreciate and understand more, but pass those stories along. And I can tell you that we, and I personally, as a Disney enthusiast first and foremost, are so grateful to have you be able to share those with me and with the listeners.
And you talked about sitting around the campfire. Early man didn't sit around the campfire just to tell stories. They sat around to eat that day's catch. And you promised that if I told these stories, we would go somewhere here on property and would eat. And so that is the true story, and the true secret of Jim Korkis is he can be bought by food. And I can be bought by chocolate. I love See's chocolate. I love dark chocolate. Lou, I love eating, and I love eating with you. And I think it's about time for us to wrap this up and go do that.
A little trout with some holes in it, and then I'll take you over to Ghirardelli. How's that?
It sounds perfect. Sounds like the perfect meal. Thank you so much, Lou. I look forward to doing these podcasts. Thanks to all of those listeners, and thanks to all those wonderful things that you write in saying that you enjoy hearing these stories. I enjoy telling them. And again, go share those stories and go buy my book.
Vault of Walt. Vault of Walt. That's all the time we have for this week's show. Thanks so much for taking the time and tuning in this and every week. Of course, huge thanks goes out to everybody who came on the WDW radio cruise on the Disney Dream, as well as the meets of the month in Walt Disney World, both before and after the cruise. I am truly at a loss for words, you know how difficult that is for me, as to how much fun we all had and what an incredible sense of community you all have created. Of course, we are going to talk much more about the cruise on the show, but I did also want to quickly share two important announcements with you, which I made on board. I'm going to go into more detail on a future show, but we all knew very early on in the cruise that it was turning into an incredible few days with laughs, new friendships, and some true Disney magic. So we decided we would do it all over again. And that means that we will be sailing on the Disney Dream once again, kind of WDW Radio Cruise 2.0, in the fall of 2012. Now, we don't have an exact date as yet, as Disney has not released dates that far out, but definitely stay tuned. As soon as we get that, we will release it. What I can tell you is that it will be in the fall, it will be on the Dream, and we are looking for a date, insert lawyer speak here, that will hopefully afford more people the opportunity to come, while still being mindful of the fact that this time of year is far less expensive, as in half, than summer and some other times of the year. We already have so many people already rebooked for this cruise who booked while they were on board. I've already marked my calendar. Love the idea of having another cruise to look forward to. Again, fall 2012. We're going to talk about this a lot more as we start getting closer. Also, I did reveal, because many people have been asking me since last year about the possibility of doing another 24-hour show. And I did let people know that I am not going to do another one this year. Instead, and I think the lack of sleep must have finally caught up, because in honor of Walt Disney World's 40th anniversary, wait for it, we'll be doing a 40-hour live broadcast and series of events in Walt Disney World starting on October 1st, 2011 and running all weekend long. Stay tuned to the show and Twitter and Facebook for more details coming very soon, and for more information about these events as well as other meets of the month, other events going on in and out of Walt Disney World, check out DisneyMeets.com, and we'll have the April Meet of the Month date hopefully in the next week or so. Don't forget to, I love hearing from you and having you all be part of the WDW Radio family and community. If you want to email me, my email address is lou@wdwradio.com if you have a question you want answered on the air, or if you want to be heard on the air with a question, a comment, just a hello from the parks, or even from the Disney Dream, you can call toll-free 888-703-2171. Be sure and come by the website for blog posts, photo galleries, videos, our fun, friendly, safe discussion forums, lots more, including our free email newsletter, the WDW Radio store, where you can get signed copies of my Walt Disney World trivia books, as well as the audio guides to Walt Disney World on CD or instantly downloadable files. Again, you can find all that at WDWRadio.com. There you can also find videos as well. I will have many more videos coming from the Disney Dream, coming in the next couple of days and weeks, so stay tuned for that. And in addition to the show, don't forget to join us every Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern for the WDW Newscast. It's a live, interactive news show covering Walt Disney World news, and you can be part of the broadcast and the discussion and talk about the news real time in the chat room while I'm doing the video broadcast. If you can't make it on Wednesday evenings, don't worry. You can watch almost right after the broadcast is over by checking out our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/WDW Radio. You can also keep the conversation going there as well by posting in the comments section. And if you want to get the audio-only portion, I'll post that in the iTunes feed as well. Be sure and come by and subscribe to the WDW Radio Show via iTunes. I also broadcast on March 2nd live from the Disney Dream. We did the newscast live from there. A little bit more Disney Dream news as opposed to Walt Disney World news, but go by, check it out on YouTube, because we also do a lengthy video tour of the Roy Disney stateroom, talk a little bit more while we're on deck. Had a lot of fun with some people who were on the cruise. Again, you can see that and all the past videos at WDWRadio.com in the video section or on YouTube.com/WDW Radio. Quick thanks to my partners and sponsors, of course, MEI and Mousefan Travel, Becky and her team. They are my official and recommended travel provider for all your vacation planning needs. No one does it the way they do, with the best possible prices and discounts. More importantly, with the most amazing level of personal service that truly is their hallmark. If you're looking to stay in around Walt Disney World, but want a vacation home with a private pool and spa, kitchen, game rooms, multiple master bedrooms, lots more, be sure and check out our friends over at allstarvacationhomes.com. And if you want to stay in the heart of Walt Disney World, you know, one of my favorite places to stay is not just because of the heavenly beds and the 17 world-class restaurants and lounges, I Heart Blue Zoo in Il Molino. Go check out swananddolphin.com. Finally, my friends, there is a lot more coming, I promise you. Now that the cruise is over, I'm playing catch-up and, of course, moving forward on a few other projects that I hope to announce in the next couple of weeks. But as always, my friends, if you like the show, all I ask is that you please help spread the word. Let others know about it. Tweet out that you're listening to the show. Share the link on Facebook. Come by, review the show and the free WDW Radio iPhone app over in iTunes. And I have to give you once again my sincerest thanks, not just for listening, but to everybody who came to the Meets of the Month and on the WDW Radio cruise. I cannot tell you, and I cannot thank you enough for giving me such an incredible, memorable experience, something I will never, ever forget, I promise you. So until next time, my friends, and I say it every week and you know it to be true, you are my friends whether we have met or not. I hope that you become inspired to pursue your passion and start to follow your dreams, and when you do, always keep moving forward. Until next week, everybody, have a great week. Thank you again. See ya.
Hey Lou, it's Todd from Jersey, a long time no speak. Just checking with you, hoping to be the first person to welcome you back from the WDW Radio cruise. I gotta tell you how jealous that I am that you guys were all out there having a great time on the Dream, and we were sitting here back in freezing cold New Jersey, wishing we were with you. welcome back from the WDW Radio Cruise. Can't wait to hear the podcast.
This is Darlene Nagy calling from the Disney Dream. Hi, guys. We're back in port. And I got some friends with me. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
We're really upset that we're getting off the Dream. But we're going to be coming back real soon. Hey, thanks, Lou. Thanks, Becky, for putting on a great party. We had a blast. Right, guys? Yeah. Okay, we'll talk to you soon, Lou.
7, cool kid.
Woo! Hi, Lou. Hi, Becky.
Hey, Lou, it's Voyager Burial, Tammy, and I'm actually in Magic Kingdom right now on a Saturday night. I forget what it is. It's March the 5th, and it's like 11 o'clock. That was my mom in the background. And we just wanted to say hi, and we wanted to say, my whole family wanted to say hi. Ready? 3. We just wanted to say that we love you, and we wanted to say hi, and we wanted to say thank you so much for the cruise, and we hope to see you next time.
Lou, I like you, but I don't love you, Lou. I like you, but I don't love you, baby.
No, he's just kidding. He loves you. And as Debbie Downer would say on SNL, my favorite ride is the Hall of Presidents, and that's where we're heading right now. So everybody have a great week. Thank you guys all so much for the cruise. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Becky. And I'll see you real soon, is what Mickey says. Bye, guys.
Hey, Lou. It's Ron and Carolyn from St. Louis. We're just sitting at the Orlando airport getting ready to go back home after the Dream Cruise. Wonderful time. Really was a great, great opportunity to meet people and of like minds. And, it was so great. We're going to do it again. How about next year? See ya. Bye.
Hey, Lou, it's Jay from Jersey. Just wanted to let you know that Chrissy, I, and the kids had an awesome time on your cruise. We're on the Magical Express heading back to the airport now, and all the planning you put into it was well worth it. It was well done. There wasn't too much of any rush or panic to accomplish things. It was a nice, casual, relaxing cruise. You had plenty of entertainment for everybody, and we're really looking forward to next year's. Oh, and by the way, we hope to see the slideshow that Tony did online. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to the Disney Cruise Line, and thank you for everything. Welcome to Disney Cruise. Thank you, and goodbye. Mwah.
You got a friend in me. You've got a friend in me. Yeah.